Hello again. So I recently moved around a couple of things with my bookshelves. I unhauled like a lot of books. I also bought a couple of books. And in the time of like moving things around to see what new way I wanted to organize my bookshelves in, I came across some other books that I read like quite a few years ago that I kind of feel like rereading. Now, I mentioned that I started a sort of a reading journal where whenever I read, I like to write down my thoughts as I'm reading because I feel like it just helps me get immersed into the story a little bit more. And all of these books that I want to reread, I read these like way before I even thought about starting a reading journal. And they're kind of books that I kind of only remember a little bit of what happens in them, and I kind of want to read them again just so that way I can kind of re-experience them, especially because with a few of these books, I don't know when I read them, I just know that I did. And with another book, I kind of enjoyed reading it, but then I sort of didn't at the end when I finished it. So like overall, I want to reread these books for like a couple of different reasons, and I kind of just wanted to share those today. One of the books that I want to reread in the future is called The Book of Unknown Americans by Cristina Enriquez. So I know I read this back in 2017 because I have a different journal where I like to track all of the books that I read. And I've had that journal since 2017. And The Book of Unknown Americans is one book that I read during 2017. I read it during that year, and then I posted my very first Bookstagram review about this book back in 2018. I feel like it might have been during August that I first put up this review as well as started my Bookstagram. And I try to think of what series of events led me to create my Bookstagram. I can't really remember if it was something that I like thought about for a long time or if I decided to do like in the spur of the moment. I can't remember my first username, though I'm sure I can look that up, but I don't want to because I feel like I'll be embarrassed. But my very first Bookstagram was about The Book of Unknown Americans by Cristina Enriquez. It's a pretty short book. I don't remember how fast I read it back then because I wouldn't write like the dates that I started a book and finished it. I would just simply write the book that I finished during that year. And I remember quite a few things from this book. It's very sporadic. I feel like the things that I'm remembering, it's like a mix from the beginning, sort of the middle, sort of the end, but I don't know if I'm mixing it up with another book or I'm just not remembering it correctly. But I do want to revisit it because I remember really enjoying it when I first read this back in 2017. And the review that I posted about this book, I can't remember, I know I looked at it, but I feel like I kept it so vague that it tells me kind of like nothing of what happened in this book. So this is just a book that I want to revisit in the future. I do remember really enjoying it, and I know when I got to sort of the series of events that led to the main characters moving over to the United States, I remember being so like shocked and really sad because I believe the main character here, the girl with the braid, I believe she suffered, well, it says on the back, I don't know why I'm saying that. She suffers an injury in Mexico and she was going to receive better medical care in the United States. So that's kind of why her family had to move there. And I remember why and how she got into the accident. And I was like so scared because it was a pretty like tragic accident. I won't say what it is. That I do remember. So because I just really want to kind of revisit the nostalgia of why I picked this book to be my first Bookstagram post, that's kind of why I want to reread this one. So with this second book, I did read it more recently than I did The Book of Unknown Americans, but it's still with enough time that I feel like I don't fully remember a lot of the details that happened in this book, and that is A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. I read this for a class that I had about like immigrant stories / immigration stories, and I think I had that class back in maybe late 2020 or early 2021, and that class was actually one of my favorite classes while I was in school. I loved a lot of the books that I read, and we would also watch movies about like the immigration story, so that was another aspect that I really liked. And A Tale for the Time Being was one of the novels that we had to read, and it just really stuck with me even after finishing that class. I put a review of this book, I think somewhere in late 2022, I want to say, but I looked at my review and I put a little bit more detail in that review compared to The Book of Unknown Americans. And I remember the reasons of why I really enjoyed this book because the main character, I believe her name is Nao, and she's living in Tokyo. She's getting bullied at school. Her parents are like, I think they get divorced or something. I can't remember. So this is again another instance of like I remember a couple of details from this book, but just not all of it, that I kind of want to reread it to revisit it again. What I do remember from this book is really liking the main character now. I believe she's a teenager, and I think the way her perspective is written, because it goes back and forth between now and an adult named Ruth, who is a writer. And the story goes in between both of their perspectives, if I'm not remembering wrong. And I really enjoyed Now's perspective because it felt like, or I think it was like, she was talking to the reader as if she was writing in her journal. And I thought she was so funny when I read this book because, again, she's a teenager, so she kind of has like no filter, and the things that she says are just so funny. And I remember the events, I think they were like with her dad and her grandparents. Something happened that I thought was just really interesting and heartwarming. I can't remember exactly, but that's kind of why I want to read it again, because again, a lot of the details are a little bit fuzzy for me, and since I do remember liking the story, I just want to reread it again. Plus, if what I wrote in my review just shows how much I enjoyed the book the first time, I really believe that I would like it just as much the second time. This next one that I have is called The Light at the Bottom of the World by London Shaw. Now, I don't typically ever buy books based on their covers, but I know with this one, I completely threw that out the window. I absolutely think the jellyfish are so beautiful. I love the purples and the blues. I love the font of the title. I love everything about the cover of this book. I didn't just buy it for the cover, but it was a pretty strong contender as to why I should get it. I know I read this book back in 2023. I just can't remember when during the year I did. I feel like maybe it was in the earlier parts of the year, but I can't remember because I didn't write down the dates for that book. With this one, I feel like I remember less about it compared to like the first two books that I mentioned. I remember finding it interesting because it's about London and it's underwater, so there's like people driving submarines to get around. There's like ocean life roaming around the city because, again, they're underwater. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I am actually pretty scared of ocean life, so I wasn't sure how I was going to fare with this book, but I remember the way that it was written. I thought it was really cool. I just really don't remember a lot of what happened. I know there's a sequel to this book, and I kind of want to read the sequel, but I just don't feel like I can read it until I reread this one first, because again, I really don't remember it. I feel like I get the general idea of what might have happened, but I feel like because the world is so complex, because again, everything is underwater, so there's like a different way of living because they all live underwater, I kind of just want a refresher on that before I even think about picking up the sequel. I feel like I remember very small things throughout this book, but I don't remember how like they lead up to the ending and like the big thing that happens, so it's definitely one that I want to revisit in the future. So with this next book, I looked up a couple of YouTube videos to hear how the author's name is pronounced, and whenever the interviewer or the host would say the author's first and last name, the author would nod, and I'm not sure if they were nodding at just being introduced for the YouTube video or if they were nodding to signify that their name was being pronounced correctly. So if the way I'm saying it, because that's how I heard it, if that's wrong, please let me know, but that's, again, how I heard their name being pronounced. And this next book is The Book of M by Pung Shepherd. I read this sometime in 2023. I feel like maybe it was earlier in the year of 2023. And I remember it taking like a week to read this book. And to be truthful, I distinctly remember not really being a fan of the ending. It did take me some time after finishing this book to really appreciate the severity and the heartbreak of the ending. But I know in the moment, I felt like the ending was a little bit frustrating and kind of underwhelming, to be honest. But now, like years back and reflecting on what this book was about, because I remember a lot of what happens in this book actually. And I think it's because the ending I wasn't a fan of. That's kind of why I remember a lot of the details of this book. I honestly feel like after years of not reading it and reflecting on it and remembering why I didn't like the ending, I honestly feel like reading it a second time around will have me appreciate it a little bit more, and I feel like I will like it a little bit more. Just thinking about what the characters go through in this world and in this book and where they're trying to go, what they're trying to do, everything that they're trying to hold on to, I feel like now I can put myself in their shoes, and I feel like the severity of everything will hit me while reading this book as opposed to like sometime after. This next book that I want to reread is Philomena by Martin Sixsmith. So I posted a review of this book back in the middle of January of 2020, but I have absolutely no idea when I read this book. I looked in my journal of where I track all of the books that I read, but I never wrote this down. I used to be pretty bad at keeping tracks of everything that I read in the past. Now I've gotten like way better at it, but I think I would just forget to write some things down, and I cannot for the life of me find when I read this book. I looked in that journal, I looked at it like 3, 4, 5, 6 times to see if I was just glossing over it, but no, it's not written in there. I checked on like my archive for my Instagram to see if I posted on my stories. It's also not there. So I have absolutely no idea when I even read this book. I remember the general story because I know I watched the movie right after reading this book, and I feel like a lot of my memory for this book is actually just coming from the movie. The review I posted for Philomena over on my Bookstagram, I feel like it doesn't really tell me much. Those are all things I already knew, but there's like smaller stuff in here that I'm sure that I'm definitely forgetting. But I feel like I just don't have a lot of the smaller details to this book. It's not enough for me to feel like I can say, yes, I read this book and I enjoyed it, because I don't remember a lot of what happened in this book. And a lot of my memory, as I mentioned, is coming from the movie. I know it's a sad story and I'm sure it's going to be really heartbreaking in a lot of moments, but I still really want to reread it. And at this point, I don't even know if I can say that I'm going to reread it, because again, I have no idea when I even picked up this book. The last book that I want to mention today is Liar, Dreamer, Thief by Maria Dong. So I read this back in 2023 and I posted a review of it back in the middle of January 2024. I love this book mainly because of the main character. She is like a hot mess and everything in her life just kept going wrong. You kind of have to feel bad for her, but that's mainly why I love her and why I love this book. So her name is Katrina and she is like super broke. She has trouble keeping jobs, if I remember correctly, and she's like super obsessed with her coworker named Kurt. And one day she gets a note from Kurt saying that he basically knows that she's been like watching him and stalking him and things like that. And one day, or I guess I should say one night, she goes to the Cuyahoga Bridge where she sees Kurt standing, and he ends up like locking eyes with her, and then he jumps off the bridge, which ends in his life being done, you know? And after his death happens, she kind of gets stuck in like this weird like mystery going on with his life and surrounding him jumping off the bridge. There was a lot of twists and turns in this book, and even thinking about it, I can't fully explain what those twists and turns were. I remember what they were, but it's so complex to even relay what happens in this book and just the mystery that she gets sucked into. And I really remember enjoying it, and that's also why I want to reread this book. But another reason is because I feel like I can kind of relate to her in a weird way. She has like these coping mechanisms that she uses where she like draws sigils all around like her house and her room, and just whenever she needs to draw the sigil to like feel comfortable. But her drawing those sigils as a coping mechanism, I kind of really related to it. And just to read a couple of pages here, on page 45, this passage goes, "I wonder if this coincidence is because of the unfinished sigil on my door, or if this is my punishment for briefly listening to music in the car. My skin itches already, but I can't exactly ride the elevator drawing endicograms until I get fired." And then another passage on page 56 goes, "It feels wrong to change something in my routine when my world doesn't feel solid." I actually really relate to that. I don't know if these are really coping mechanisms, but I have like this routine that I do sometimes. I'm not really sure how to explain it or to give a name to it, because I don't know I can't remember if she puts a name to this at the end when I think she goes to therapy, but I kind of understand her need for feeling like she needs a routine, or she needs to draw sigils on like a door or a wall or something else to feel like she can feel comfortable going throughout her day. I have a couple of those in my personal life that I do. They absolutely make no sense. I don't need to do them, but me doing them helps me feel better. And if I don't do them, I kind of start to panic, even though again, the things that I do, they just don't make sense. And I know that if I don't do them, the world isn't gonna like explode. But to me, it sometimes feels like it is if I don't do these specific routines. And again, just to read another passage where I feel like I can really relate to her, it's on page 60, and it goes, "Once I start my rituals, I need to concentrate or I risk breaking them. There won't be room for anything else." I feel that same way. I feel like when I start doing my rituals for certain things, I have a certain way and a certain order that I do these. And I feel like if something distracts me from it, I have to start over. Or even if I finish them and I'm leaving, sometimes I will go back to do them again and again and again just to feel better. And it's kind of gotten me sort of in trouble because I would do these rituals and routines like so many times over and over. I would even record myself doing these rituals, but I still wouldn't feel better to just leave. I would need to go do them again. That I started, like, I would get to work a couple of minutes late, and I'm not like that at all. Being late gives me anxiety. So the fact that I was doing these rituals just over and over, that it was bleeding into other things in my life, I kind of understand how she feels, even though, again, like, maybe it doesn't make sense to do these routines, but it brings me comfort. But again, not to read more passages because I tabbed like a couple more. Just the way she feels like she needs to do these sigils and these routines, I felt like I could really relate to her. And I feel like that's also kind of what made the story just really compelling for me to read. Again, the twists and the turns and everything else that happens in this book were like really wild and so complex and so like, I don't even know what word to put to it. But all of those reasons are why I really enjoyed this book the first time, and I kind of just feel like rereading it again just to feel that same entertainment. So as I've mentioned, Liar, Dreamer, Thief is the last book that I wanted to talk about today. In terms of when I would reread all of these books, I have like no idea. All of these books, I guess aside from the Book of Unknown Americans by Cristina Enriquez, they're pretty lengthy books that I don't know if I should do like a full reread of them or if I should just skim a couple of pages, or if I should like make a schedule for myself and start the book like at the start of the month and read a certain amount of chapters every week so that way I can finish by the end of the month or something. I don't know. I just know when I saw these, I really feel like I should revisit them. I just don't know when I would. And I just don't want to like rush through them either because I feel like that wouldn't be fair in giving them a second chance. So I have no idea when I'll even reread these books. I just know that I do. I also think this time around, I will actually take the time to read the book and write down my thoughts in the reading journal that I have, because I feel like not having it, I feel like that kind of made it harder for me to remember a couple of things with these books. And I feel like writing my thoughts out after reading them a second time, I feel like it'll be a different experience. I believe that is all that I had for today. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope that I see you next time.